The only parameter that I was given when we started this project was that Halloween had made a lot of money at the box office and we were going to rip it off. And that's Sean's exact quote. He said, Halloween's making a lot of money, let's rip it off. So I went and saw Halloween, and I learned that you make a horror movie, at least one like Halloween, by starting with a prior evil that starts before the movie ever starts. Put a whole bunch of teenagers together who are all randy and looking to make love. Then you have to put them in some sort of environment in which the adults can't be of any help to them whatsoever. And then you kill them off one by one. The first title I had, the working title for Friday the 13th, was Long Night at Camp Blood, which if Sean had gone ahead with that title, which he was smart not to do, you and I would never have met.
You see, Jason was my son, and today is his birthday.
The whole concept, the prior evil was that Jason had been allowed to drown, and by camp counselors who were too busy making love to watch out for him. So of course that gave me my motivation for the killing character, Mrs. Voorhees, and so we were off and running with her. Yeah.
Originally, when they went to cast the role of Jason Voorhees as a little boy, the first thought was, hey, they're going to use Sean's son, Noel. But what I've heard through the grapevine is that Mrs. Cunningham would have none of that, which is good for me. And, you know, although, you know, I've met Noel and now he's a director and everything, so I don't think it would have tarnished his career, certainly hasn't mine. Then Sean turned to Steve Miner, I've heard, and said, well, what do you think? It was Steve Miner who said, what about that little guy, Ari? Because I had done a film with them just prior to Friday the 13th. And, you know, they basically just called me up, said, can you swim? I said, yes. They're like, great, you're in, dude.
Being the first one killed, you know, in Friday the 13th Part 1 is quite, it's a lot of fun to have that in my back pocket. My husband somewhere and says, my wife is the first one killed in Friday the 13th Part 1. I mean, they look at me differently, you know, all of a sudden they go, oh, like they're in the presence of somebody like, you know, royalty, which is so funny.
Harry Crosby, he latched on to us, you know, because we were doing stunts and we were physical and, you know, and he would try to do stuff. He got hurt one day, he fell on his tailbone, I think, and hurt it real bad. Just flying backwards when we faked the punch at him, you know, he hit a rock. But he hung out with us and he was great. He would sit in the back seat of the car and just play guitar all day as we drove from location to location, you know. He's Harry Crosby, so we surely questioned him of what the relationship was, you know, and his sister is the actress, you know, that we were all, you know, love, and what Bing was like, and he was, I think Harry was one of the last kids, I think, to come along, I think. You know, we had to do some hideous stuff to Harry, you know, the whole arrow in the hair and the head bit. He loved it all. In fact, he would walk around with all these arrows sticking out of him one day, you know, so anybody lucky enough to get a picture of that, I have a few. We were leaving. We had shot Betsy Palmer's beheading, you know, and Tasso's hands coming up in the frame. And we had the car packed, me and Tasso, and we were leaving to go back to Pittsburgh, and we were passing the set. They were all done with us as far as effect-wise, but they were doing the fight between Adrian and Betsy. So we stopped and staged the fight on the way leaving, you know, so there was only one time that Sean wanted me to shoot an arrow, and that was at the target while Laurie Bartram was near it, you know. But he wanted to know how accurate I could be with the bow and arrow. Meanwhile, Tasso and I would shoot boxes out of each other's hands with bows and arrows, you know. Not too far away, but, you know, we were pretty good. So he went up to the target and pointed at the middle, and I shot the arrow right there when he pointed. And it scared him because he was, he was pointing at the target, and he thought we were being unsafe, but we were just being deadly accurate. I mean, I was wound up, ready to go, and like, where do you want it? He pointed at the target. He was like 5 feet away from it, so I just, and, But obviously he trusted us from that point on.
Ta-da! First time, they didn't let, Tom said, don't show her the makeup, So I kind of walked out in the water, and they brought the boat on. She hadn't really seen me. I was facing the other way. I go underwater, I turn around. So when I jump up out, she was actually frightened. She jumped out of the boat and everything. So they had to dry her off and blow dry her hair. And, it's kind of shows her acting skill because she knew I was there.
We made a decision early on that the music would only be when the killer was around. So we left a lot of music. There's really not that much music in that film, actually, so that the music really went with the killer.
Oh, hi. What are you doing out in this mess?
I kept the score extremely, extremely tight, almost always the same pitches, the same material for the entire film. And I think that there was subsequently, after seeing it and how it worked, it had a certain power to it that was just magically sort of there. In movies like Jaws or Psycho or films that have that sort of identifiable sound to them, invariably it's some actually very short piece of musical material. So I call the score myopic in that way, and that it just was only for that. I mean, I could give you two examples in the film. One where Laurie Barton was setting up the archery set at the camp. There's this guy who's sort of the clown guy of the thing, and he shoots an arrow right into the bullseye of the archery thing while she's setting it up, which is obviously quite dangerous and stuff. But in pretty much any other film, and actually even in subsequent Friday the 13th films, there would have been a musical sting and something that would just try to scare the heck out of you. But we completely let it go because it wasn't the killer, and it was an obvious place for a piece of music, but we let it go because that was the decision.
Here, let me give you a hand with that.
Thank you.
There's a scene where Steve, who is the guy who's reopening the camp, has a scene with Adrian. I believe he's like fixing a gutter or something, and he comes down from the ladder, and they have a little bit of a conversation.
All right.
And just as he's walking away from her, you get the feeling that there was some sort of romantic relationship between the two of them. And he just puts his hand across her cheek like this as he walks away. Once again, it was a visual and obvious place for a piece of music, for me to do something to underline that. But again, completely left alone, only for the killer.
I was like getting into character, So I went over by the water. I was staring into the water, What would it be like to be that kid? And I'm doing that, and I'm getting into it, and Kevin Bacon walks up. He's like, hey, Ari, what you doing? And I'm like, I'm getting into character, man. And he just laughed, He's like, Harry, come over here. Tell him what you said. Tell him what you said. I'm like, I'm getting into character. Don't you guys do that? Totally naive. And they just, they laughed at that.
The ending of Friday the 13th came about as a result of, during one of the rewrites, Sean said, we need a chair jumper. And I said, you mean something like Carrie? And he said, yeah. And so I basically started with the Jason coming out of the water, and the rest is history. The original ending was just simply cutting off the head, and that was it.
And there was no ending to the screenplay, not one that they wanted. I mean, I think there was something there, but it was just a typical ending, you know. So I started talking about Carrie and how shocking the hand coming up was, and if we could do that with like Jason coming up, but he said, well, but Jason will be dead. I said, no, if you make it a dream, you get away with anything, you know. So I think then he went to Victor, and he put that all together, you know, the way he did. But so the whole ending was something we just came up with, you know.
I wrote a song called Sail Away Tiny Sparrow, and basically it was a country tune about a girl who had a bad marriage, and so we came to the end of the film where they wanted the jump out of the chair thing, and I had to write something, and this was really the only place in the film where literally the music was now going to manipulate the audience and not be the killer anymore. It was going to, the object was, this movie is over, and put on your coat, Martha, it's time to go home sort of feeling that we wanted to get. And I said, well, I've got to come up with something that just seems everything's wonderful and everything is nice and everything is okay and that sort of thing. And so I thought to myself, waste not, want not, and I'm saying, sail away. She's in a boat. She's out there sailing on the lake. Why not just take that tune, the country tune, and sort of play it as a nice, lush, sort of elegant, kind of quiet, peaceful morning on the lake sailing along.
When the movie came out, my brother gave me a call. He was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I was on the East Coast. He called and he went, Robbie, do you have any idea how big Friday the 13th is? It's like, Rob, it's huge. You know, it's making all this money and people are going crazy over it.
I was sitting outside of a producer's office in California after Friday the 13th was a major hit. And he didn't know that I could hear through his door, and we hadn't had our talk yet. And he was saying to somebody on the other end of the phone, what this kid has done is taken Mom and Apple Pie and the Pepsi generation and stood them on their head. And then of all villains there to be, instead of some horrible little creature from the Black Lagoon, it was Mom, and Mom was totally justified in a twisted little way for doing what she did. And I think that just, that grabbed people, and I think a lot of it should be handed to Tom Savini. I think his special effects were outstanding, and they just grabbed people, you know. And I think Betsy Palmer, and I think Adrienne King, and the actors all sort of made this thing work. I was really thrilled, and my expectations sitting down and doing it had not been huge, you know. Because I knew I was following Halloween. I certainly didn't think we would equal it in any way, and I was astounded to find us, you know, beating out all kinds of movies with all sorts of artistic attempts.